you just watched this movie, so you have no
Yeah.
memories of watching this movie, and I
Well,
can't actually remember when I saw it, but I do remember seeing it, and however, I always remember this trailer. Like,
mhm.
I always remember seeing it and being like, "Whoa, like, that's cool." Like, he's got, saw lightning, like, like, so I don't know when I actually saw the film, but I do remember when I watched the film, I was like, "Oh," I was like, "I'm kind of disappointed that there's no, like, lightning scene, like, in
Yeah,
the
there
film," right?
should have
So
been lightning. That's true. There is there's also distinctly less, chainsaw dancing in this film too, which I was disappointed by. I'm not
less
gonna lie.
chainsaw dance? Oh,
Less
because
chainsaw
that's your
dancing.
shirt with the chainsaw dancing on it, right?
And they even do it at the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Stretch
Yes,
has
that's
her little
true.
dance that she does.
That's true.
So I was expecting, especially with the lightning, I wanted some fire on the dance floor with this chainsaw, but
Well,
I did not
maybe
get
they
that.
just didn't wanna rehash anything.
Maybe they just didn't want to make it too much of a thing that they just like, there's two things we have in Texas Chainsaw Massacre: Leatherface and dancing. And I,
Yeah.
I
They
just wanted
opted
to
for the
step away from that.
Texas and the chainsaws instead, but yeah. And the massacre, I guess, but,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, me too.
okay, so let's talk about the film. Let's get into the characters, let's get into the casting, let's get into what we liked about it, what we didn't like about it, et cetera, but, this film, obviously came out in 1990, was a sequel to the first 2 films, sort of a soft reboot. I don't know, I think it's kind of, I mean, you wouldn't call it a rebootquel nowadays, but
No,
I do feel that this film is kind of, it does have its own audience, for sure. I think it's my favorite sequel, to be honest. Like Texas
I
Chainsaw
might be that
Massacre.
audience.
Yeah, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first one is one of my all-time favorite horror films. I think it's just one of the best. It just gives me the same feeling no matter when I watch it in my life. I
Mm,
always have this sense of terror and dread. I think it's an amazingly captured film.
yeah,
And all the stories behind the scenes, and we don't need to get into them, but potentially like how they filmed it and stuff, just real sort of like a renegade type film that was filmed,
yeah.
and it just has that visceral sort of like emotion to it. Tarantino says it's a perfect film, the first one, that you
Mm,
can't change anything in the film, and I would tend to agree with him. Now, second one is a bit. I like the second one a lot, but it is. We got to make sure we don't swear on this, right? So we're
we can't
trying.
swear. We're doing our best.
It's insanely crazy. And then this movie, when they obviously tried to reboot the series, and you can obviously tell that they moved all the focus onto Leatherface himself, especially in part of the marketing, to kind of create another, like, let's say Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, that type of thing going into the 90s. And back in that day, back in those times, like a lot of those series had kind of maybe run their course, or they were trying to kind of get them going in a new decade and carrying them over from the 80s. Of course, Scream hadn't come out yet.
Mhm.
So there was sort of this lull in horror where they were like, who's the next big like boogeyman? Who's the next big slasher killer or whatever? And I guess they tried to make Leatherface that that icon. Of
Making
course,
that
New Line
comeback.
acquiring the rights now housed, New Line was obviously built on the success of Nightmare on Elm Street. So then now they have two amazing um, horror icons under one roof. And so it's interesting that they never really did anything with that, which I think is kind of like a bit of a missed opportunity. But I think this film sort of accomplishes what it set out to do, and I think that they should have just like it's a shame because obviously it didn't do well numbers wise, it didn't do well critically. Although I don't know what this movie would expect to get, but um, I really feel they should have just stuck the course, and I think that they would have maybe created a franchise just by sheer will, but I
Mhm.
think they decided to make an adjustment. They didn't really know where to take it after this, and it feels to me like a movie that was really confident it was going to do what it was going to do, and it didn't do that. But now,
Yeah.
ultimately, I think over time, I think it actually has done that, and I think it has turned Leatherface into like this kind of horror icon, yeah, especially in this movie, right? So,
Yeah, I feel like if the Toby Hooper 1970s original is like punk rock horror, like in terms of like just, the filmmaking and the style of it and just how like visceral it is, it's very punk rock to me. I feel like this movie is like, it's very 90s. It definitely kind of has a like that almost grunge rock, but like pop grunge rock feel to it, where it feels like it's very, I'm not going to say polished, but it definitely feels, it's got its own vibe, I'll say. It feels very different from the 1970s Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It definitely has its own particular flavor to it. It's not quite as sun scorched. There's a lot of this movie that takes place at the night time, which is a little bit different for it. The cast is definitely actually surprising. Like I really kind of really enjoyed members of the cast in this, which I know we're going to talk about them shortly. Should we want to get into casting now? Let's dive into it.
Yeah, we can jump into the casting because I mean, there's like, let's get the big guy out of the way,
Yeah.
and we're gonna throw up some, for those of you who are tuning in at home and watching us on YouTube, we're gonna throw up a few stills from the movie so you can check it out what we're talking about. Fortunately, if you're listening to radio, like I said on the Candyman episode, I got a face for radio, right? So like,
Use your
use
imagination.
your imagination as to what we're actually explaining. We'll explain it to you. It's just so you can create a picture
We'll
in
paint a
your
picture.
mind. But yeah, sure, let's go. Do you want to lead it off? Let's talk about the casting.
Yeah, so I mean, Ken Foree, I love him so much and everything he pops up and he's always so great. And I love his character in this is like the survivalist type of I do kind of love the introduction where he's gets in this big car wreck with our two kind of leads, I guess, Michelle and I want to say his name is Ryan. Yep, Ryan. Um, and they just kind of get through this big accident. They're telling him like we're running away from this guy. This guy's chasing us. He's got a chainsaw. And he's like, okay, just take these painkillers. You'll be fine. And just basically like knocks them out more or less with painkillers, which as someone who fancies himself like a survivalist and is trying to help, like giving someone who immediately got into a car accident and probably has a concussion, like here's some painkillers to knock you out is a terrible idea. I'm just going to put that out there. However, when he, again, spoilers, and this movie was supposed to, die when he does near the end, test audiences reacted to him so favorably that they brought him
Mm.
back, though it makes absolutely no sense to bring him back for the last scene. They brought him back because he was so popular. They're like, we can't kill this guy off. We got to make a grand return with just like a cut on his forehead for some reason, even though he's supposedly been demolished by this chainsaw underwater. Makes no sense. I don't care. I'm here for it. Kate
Yeah,
Hodges
it's
Michelle.
very weird. It's very weird too
It's
because like
very weird.
you really do get a sense that like he does just kind of spring up at the end.
He literally
Also,
springs into the scene. He's like, hey, and just like pops back up there.
I'd be remiss in saying like, and oh my God, I feel like my dad when I say this stuff because like when I was a kid, it's like, oh, whatever, dad, who cares? Like, but like I was like, he's totally dry. Even when I watched him now, he's literally being like, was what underwater, held underwater
Yes,
by Leatherface at the end in the kind of the big climax of the film, and he kind of he picks Michelle up here at the end, and she's totally or he's totally dry, like he's
totally
just
dry.
had those clothes, like it's so weird.
Also, like they
Yeah.
go from dead of night to midday as well. I'm not gonna not draw attention to that fact either, but
Well, she's walking for a bit, right? I mean,
well,
it's
then maybe he
Texas.
had time to dry off. It's Texas.
Yeah, the
He's
sun
under
just
that
comes
hot
up like
Texan
yeah, the
sun.
sun just comes up like that in Texas. That's how it works.